All right. Good morning, everybody. It's Sunday morning, and we are on week 8 of our study of Genesis. We have been flying through the chapters comparatively, but we'll see what happens today. First, let's go ahead and pray, and then we'll dive in.
Thank you, Jesus.
Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this time and this place, for this body of believers and this opportunity to get into your word. Father, we just want to stop and acknowledge that you are holy, and that you should be holy and kept holy in our hearts and our minds and our words and our deeds. Father, we want to really just acknowledge that you are God, that you are King, that you are our Father, that you're in charge here, and that this isn't something we're doing as part of a club or part of a religious observance. We're really here to come and meet you. So be here, Father. Be welcome. Be manifest in your word. We invite you to show off and to meet us where we are and bring us to where you are. Father, all this we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so review time. We have, again, just a brief, of course, I don't think the camera can actually see me. They just see my arm disappear going here. We've got a brief summary of what we've done in the previous weeks. Last week was week 7. We'd covered Genesis 13 through 15. And just hitting the high points here. We have a lot on Abram and Lot. It says at the beginning of 13, we see that as they were in the land of Canaan, Abram and Lot were both wealthy, but they were too big for the area, so they had to split up. This is important because part of God's command to Abram was to leave his father's household, his relatives, and go to the land that God would show him, but he brought his nephew Lot, so he didn't leave his relatives. So now we see, fortunately, we see that God blessed them so richly that they had to separate. Lot went off to the land of Sodom and Gomorrah, which was fertile and beautiful, at least in its natural state. I'm not talking about the people. But when Lot left, this put Abram in alignment with what God had said. And then we see immediately after that God reestablishes his promise with him. But because Lot was still in the area, still where he shouldn't have been, he caused more trouble. Abram had to rush in and rescue Lot. So there's the whole big war with Sodom and Gomorrah and their enemies, but he comes in and rescues it right in the middle of the victory moment. We get Melchizedek who comes in, and he's a large figure in biblical legend. I'm not really sure how to say it, but he's a figure that is compared to Christ, and Christ is compared to him in multiple times. I actually wanted to go ahead and I pulled this off of gotquestions.org, just because I like to cite my sources. But Melchizedek, whose name means King of Righteousness, his actual name can be it's almost like they took the name King and Righteousness and hooked it together. So Melech and Zedek is like Melech is king, and then Zedek is righteousness. So King of Righteousness, all in one name, Melchizedek. But also he was the king of Salem, Salem being another form of shalom, so he's also the king of peace. So it's lots of neat stuff just built in his name. Priest of Most High, and then there's some references to where he's spoken of, both here in Genesis, the psalm that he uses that says that the Messiah would be a priest in the order of Melchizedek is Psalm 110:4. And then Hebrews talks about him in 2 different spots, making the connection between Christ and Melchizedek. He's got a sudden appearance and disappearance. It makes him this mystery, but this legend. Interesting point. It's not a major one, but if you look, not sure how visible it is, but you'll notice I've got the H-A in Abraham highlighted because they called him Abraham, but his name hasn't been changed yet. So this is actually Melchizedek meets with Abram, not Abraham. Ultimately, it ends up being the same person, but there's something very significant about a name change. When God does it, he's met you and he's changed who you are. So just emphasize that it was actually Melchizedek and Abram. And we went over the story last time, but anyway, wanted to bring that up. He's King of Peace. Again, he's the priest of God Most High, but there's also an important perspective check, just as this goes. Like Abram's just had this huge victory against these armies. He's rescued Lot. The king of Sodom is about to come out, but before that happens, Melchizedek says, "Blessed is Abram of God Most High," and then "Blessed be God Most High," and just all this, and says that God's given him this victory. And so before he deals with, Abram's dealt with the world, then gets brought into this heavenly perspective before he deals with the world again. And so he makes this statement like, I'm not going to keep anything because I trust God completely for the source of my riches, and I'm not going to give anybody else his glory for what God's going to do for me. And then we wrap up in 15 where God establishes that there's going to be a covenant through the bloodline of Abram. And that he would have many descendants and so forth. And so that brings us, one more. 3 questions. So where's the God of love in that passage? God meets us within our limitations and imperfections. Even though Abram's obedience wasn't perfect, God didn't just punish him for it. He did withhold the fullness of what he was doing until the fullness of the obedience had been met. But he still blessed, still met. He still showed up with Abram, and that's huge. And that some people might not think this, but part of God's love is that he does make covenants with us. He establishes an agreement, a relationship with us. A covenant is a relationship. There's something going to be done on both sides, and God is faithful. He makes these arrangements with us. It's not something he just does over his property. It's something he does in conjunction with his people. And why does he preserve this? This shows that God's gracious, but that he doesn't compromise. He can wait, but he is gracious. He'll withhold the fullness. He knows what's going to happen. He knows how it's going to happen, but it doesn't mean that he's punishing necessarily, although he will. Like a father disciplines his children, but it's just super important for us to realize that, one, he is God and he is Father, but he's also Father and God. So he doesn't compromise, but he meets us where we are, and that's humongous. That's mind blowing. How does this apply to my life? So I cannot presume that just because God is currently blessing me, he is satisfied with my level of obedience. God blesses me not because I'm good, but because he is. I was actually talking with my wife yesterday. It's like, we've got to stop and evaluate things. If we feel like there's more to what God has for us than what we're actually receiving, then it might just mean that we haven't grown enough for it, but it also might mean that we need to check and see what God's promised us and what he's told us to do, and see, are we really obeying as completely as we should be? Is there stuff that I'll go this far, but I'm going to compromise personally, like Abram did. He left his father's household, he went to the land, but he didn't leave all the relatives. There's still that little bit of Lot left over that he's brought along. And so sometimes it's a good idea for us to check and see if we brought a lot with us. Yes.
Okay,
have we brought an unwelcome nephew with us? No, that's not good either.
So it's quality, not quantity?
I don't even know anymore. I just lost my stuff and all that. Anyway, there are things that we're holding on to from our old life that God has asked us to leave behind, and it's a good idea to evaluate, not to necessarily condemn ourselves or allow that, and don't go for a witch hunt in your own heart and mind, because that'll ruin you. Just take my word on that. But it's always good to be open. It's like if it seems like God's blessings are being restrained, make sure that it's not because of us. And if it's not because of us, then it's God's good timing, in which case whatever it is right and good and best. And we're going to see a lot more of that in where we're headed today. So, chapter 16. And again, we're in the New American Standard, the 2020 version. So, all right. So, Sarai and Hagar. And I pretty much ought to just put a sign up or a sticker that says, I saw something I never saw before. But we're going to be looking at some patterns that kind of jumped out. And I'm not going to necessarily say, like, this is this is something you can like take to the bank. But these are some thoughts that came out as I was reading this time. Some observations and just stuff for us to consider and think about. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had not borne him a child. But she had an Egyptian slave, slave woman whose name was Hagar. So Sarai said to Abram, "See now, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Please have relations with my slave woman. Perhaps I will obtain children through her." And Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. And so, after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Abram's wife Sarai took Hagar the Egyptian, her slave woman, and gave her to her husband Abram as his wife. Then he had relations with Hagar, and she conceived. And when Hagar became aware that she had conceived, her mistress was insignificant in her sight. So Sarai said, "Abram, may the wrong done to me be upon you. I put my slave woman into your arms, but when she saw that she had conceived, I was insignificant in her sight. May the Lord judge between you and me." I'm going to pause right there because there's so much. Okay. Okay, Sarai, some things that are going to get that we see repeated several times here. One of them is that every time Hagar is mentioned, she's mentioned as the Egyptian slave. And I did a little bit of research. One of the problems we've got in an English translation, especially in America, is there are connotations to the word slave that we have with our history that they did not have with their history. There's I won't say very different, but there were some significant differences in that relationship. She was property, but not the way we associate. There was a relationship here. A handmaiden was more than just property.
They were still individualized.
Oh, sure. They still a human, still somebody made in the image of God, still like somebody who there weren't legal things because the law hasn't come yet, but there was understanding that there's only so far you can go with this. There were cultural differences where marriage and that type of relationship were concerned that muddy the waters for us, but not for them. All that's side note. What I want to point out here is it's like, okay, so it said she had an Egyptian slave woman whose name was Hagar. Then we go down and see that repeated. But before we go there, there's just so much here. It's all like woven together. So Sarai said to Abram, "See now, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children." Sarai is blaming God for her not having children. That word is restrained. It's like literally means the Lord has put his hand or a guard to hold back this thing from happening. It's like, please have relations with my slave woman. Perhaps I can obtain children through her. Now, either this means the Lord... See, and the language is so specific. I've always read this as the Lord hasn't let me have children. Perhaps we can do it this way. But the way it's actually written sounds like she's saying the Lord has stopped me. Right. And then so now she's saying, so do it this way. I can't help but read it this time as though she's literally trying to go around what God's done. God stopped this from happening. On that note, keep in mind that they're in Canaan now. It says that verse 3, so after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, ... That's where Sarai offers Hagar. So they've been in Canaan. Now, where were they before they were in Canaan? We go back a couple of chapters, chapter 12. That's that whole episode where Abram lies about Sarai being his sister, and she gets added to the wives of the Egyptian king. Now, when it all comes out, they make Abram leave, force him back into the promised land, but they left with riches and were given many things, including manservants and maidservants or handmaidens. Hagar is a result of the episode in Egypt. So, in that episode in Egypt, Abram had let his wife become the wife of someone else. Now, There's a lot of other things going on here. So they leave Egypt, and there's a 10-year period between that point and where this is now. In that period, we've got Lot is still in the mix. We don't know how long the time is between Lot and leaving and this. But we get the impression based on the narrative that this is happening at least after the Sodom and Gomorrah battle issue is done. But there's also, there are things that are established later on in the law, but there's times of purity and impurity and uncleanness, but that are observed like after childbirth, after the monthly period. There's a period of time that has to go by. Even the land, every 7 years later on, we establish it needs a time of rest. So we have Lot being removed from the picture, which fixes at least that part of the obedience. But then we've also got this period where Sarai had been made the wife of another and had come back to Abram. And so it's almost like there's a period of a purification period going on here before they can move on into this. But instead of trusting what God said, Sarai is literally saying, like, God has prevented me. It's like almost God has prevented this promise from happening. Let's do it this way. It's always been this whole idea of what comes with Ishmael has been, it's like mankind helping God out. But this is almost like mankind helping God despite him. Yep. I might be reading too much into it, but it just jumped out at me. It's like, the wording is very specific here. There's more to this. Or there could be more to this. Because here we've got Hagar and Sarai, no indication that there's anything wrong with this relationship. I mean, they've been together at least 10 years at this point. And again, the relationship, like a handmaiden, it's a very specific, you're a handmaiden to the wife of the patriarch of this property. I mean, it's a big deal. I mean, it's like the cupbearer or the head baker for the pharaoh. This is almost a royal position. It's not a little thing. But what Sarai has offered Hagar is you can step up from just being a handmaiden to actually being it's a concubine. It's a lower level, lower class wife, but you're still going to be a wife of the patriarch. That's a big deal. Also a potential heir producer. Now, there is something about Sarai's attitude in this that suggests to me that it's possible she didn't think that it was really that she was the problem. And this is conjecture. This is complete conjecture. But it almost looks like she said, like, go ahead and have this handmaiden, because it's almost like she doesn't think it could really happen. But then Hagar does get pregnant and saying, like, well, I guess we know what the problem is here. And so now you may be the first wife, but I'm the mother of the heir. And so that's huge status change. Also, it is a blatant, in your face, here you go, Sarai, you've been here all this time and done nothing and accomplished nothing for the heir for this man. And you really think you're going to be remembered. I mean, there's a lot here. I mean, the culturally speaking, it's huge. And Hagar has basically gone from a handmaiden to now she's pregnant, and she's going to have the heir, the only one that's been seen in Abram is in his 80s now. So there's a lot in all of that. But again, Hagar is there because of the actions done by Abram in Egypt that were less than the trust that he could have shown God. So it's a lot of speculation, but I mean, instead of just trusting that God would protect him, they lied about it and got into this whole relationship. We keep seeing over and over and over again, when Abram does something, he's doing it like 90% obedience, but then there's this little bit of lack of trust where he tries to fix something and it causes long-range complications and troubles. We're going to see more still with Lot.
Now, had God revealed to Abram where he was supposed to go by the time he went to the Egyptians?
He had brought him into that land. It wasn't so much the fact that he had left Canaan. It was the fact that God had said, I'm going to make a mighty nation of you. But he told Sarai to lie because they might kill me for you.
Yeah, but God had not revealed when he told him to go where to, right?
He said, to the land I will show you. I'm not sure if it was that yet at that point.
So he was still, I guess, obedient in the sense that he was moving.
He was still moving, yes.
But he took it upon himself to decide
How to protect him. Right.
Which was a ruse, not wisdom.
Well, it was, yes.
Do you think it was God that made the Egyptians force Abram back into the promised land? Or was it...
Oh, absolutely. Because they were basically, they wasn't just like a dream that said you shouldn't do this. God hit the Egyptians with plagues. He made Abram very much unwelcome there. Like they were punished for this relationship, and then it was revealed to them what was going on. It's like, okay, this shouldn't have ever happened. You shouldn't have ever put us in this situation. None of us deserved any of this type of treatment from you. Now take your wife, take all these gifts, and get out. And they ended up going back to Canaan, specifically back to Bethel, which is where Abram had met God before, and had called on the name of the Lord.
There are consequences.
Oh, yes. And some of them are very, very long-reaching. So, but the thing is, Hagar is a result, or appears to be a result, of that little fiasco. And here she is, part of another fiasco. And we're going to see the same thing with Lot, repeatedly coming back into the story when he never should have been there to begin with. And almost always it ends up, it's like the sin just keeps revisiting and revisiting and revisiting. We're going to see the descendants, because here's the thing is, Abram has been blessed by God to be a father of many nations. I mean, this is coming. In fact, this is what we're about to hit. But is I will bless them that bless you, and I will curse them that curse you. Well, the thing is that God is going to do that. And this is a blessing. And the blessing is going to continue through. It's just going to end up continuing through to people who are going to be a problem later on. Even Lot, who has been a blessing to Abram, he wasn't supposed to be there. So he still gets blessed because God is God, but the consequences are far-reaching. All right. So yeah, like I said, I read through this and then saw all these patterns and these implications. It's like, well, and then we get to Sarai. So now her handmaiden, who is now Abram's wife, is treating Sarai wrong, which is wrong. I mean, there's no excuse for this. But then Sarai, I don't want to downplay what Sarai's been through. I mean, she's spent her entire life a faithful wife, and she got sent off to be like a wife to the Egypt. I mean, she hasn't had a great deal. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff, but I mean, this is high stress, and especially in their culture, to not have children in all this time was shameful. Yeah. It was a burden for her. And so she says, may the wrong done to me be upon you. She's like, now this is your fault. Sarah is real big about pointing the finger as to whose fault things are. And I put my slave woman into your arms. She conceived, now I'm insignificant. That's like actually despised in her eyes. May the Lord judge between you and me. But Abram said to Sarai, see, Abram should have trusted God from the beginning. Nowhere in any of this stuff did God say, you need to figure out how to make this happen. So this is another time where God has made a promise, and Abram has tried to use his own knowledge, own wisdom to help God along, and it's going to be trouble. Look, your slave woman is in your power. Do to her what is good in your sight. See, she wasn't just Sarai's slave woman anymore. When Abram took her as a wife, he assumed certain responsibilities. She changed status, and because it wasn't just. He shouldn't have done this. He shouldn't have gotten in this situation anyway. But he had responsibilities, things that end up getting spelled out in Exodus later on, partly because there's so much confusion. Apparently, like you can't just abandon her. You can't just do this. And he did. He turned her over to Sarai, and Sarai treated her harshly, and she fled. I mean, you can't really blame Hagar. I mean, she's in this position. She's got this now. She took some presumptions and some liberties with how she treated Sarai, which she should not have done. But then she's got no recourse. See, the thing is, and the Bible is very clear about the role of a husband and wife, is the husband is a protector, a guardian, a covering for the wife, which is one of the reasons why, I'm really jumping all over the place here, but the divorce laws in Exodus are very clear to free the woman up to go seek more covering so that she's no longer still bound by a covering that won't protect her. So suddenly Hagar is completely exposed and in danger because Sarai, she's not having it. So Hagar runs. And here's something else that's just wild to me. Now the angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness. That's not an angel of the Lord. That's the words, the angel of the Lord. And it's generally referring to, this is the same phrase that's used with the angel of the Lord is what was in the burning bush and met with Moses. It's also the angel of the Lord that comes and interacts with Abram later on with some of the face-to-face covenant making.
Is that a Christophany?
As a pre-incarnate Christ, like Jesus before he was Jesus, that is a major assumption. There's a lot of evidence that seems to prove that.
The word is Jehovah.
Yes, I mean it's the angel of the Lord. It's like the avatar of God. It's literally God in a form that's something we can interact with without being consumed, which is who Jesus was. He's just made flesh. This is whatever it was he was doing before he actually was born as a human.
Protective custodian.
Something but he was the angel of the Lord, found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, by the spring on the way to Shur. He said, Hagar, Sarai's slave woman, from where have you come and where are you going? And she said, I am fleeing from the presence of my mistress Sarai. So the angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress and submit to her authority. There's a lot right there. That busts a lot of theology, folks.
If she hadn't run her mouth in the first place, she probably wouldn't be where she is.
She'd actually be in a pretty good position. But the angel of the Lord also said to her, I will greatly multiply your descendants, so they will be too many to count. The angel of the Lord said to her further, behold, you are pregnant, and you will give birth to a son, and you shall name him Ishmael. I'm going to click this. God hears. That's a good name. It's a shame that it's become associated with so much else. Because the Lord has heard your affliction. I mean, Hagar, she shouldn't have been there. She shouldn't have been in the situation she's in. That's not really any her fault. Now, the one thing that was her fault, the angel's already addressed, to go back and submit to the authority. But then we see God. That he's going to be, I will greatly multiply your descendants so that they will be too many to count. This is, it's amazing to me. I mean, I was there, but it's amazing to me that people will continually say how much the Old Testament is about God's judgment and his wrath and his anger and his vengeance. And I'm like, did you keep reading? My son was asking me about one passage, like, well, where's the God of love in that? I said, well, and he said, never mind, I just need to read another verse down. I'm like, exactly. So you name him Ishmael, because the Lord has heard your affliction. But he will be a wild donkey of a man, translated differently in most of the other translations. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand will be against him, and he will live in defiance of all his brothers. Then she called the name of the Lord, who spoke to her, you are a God who sees me. In other translations, that's El Roi, It's where we get the name Elroy, of all things, but it means the God who sees. And then this line is, have I even seen him here and lived after he saw me? It's like, I've seen the God who sees me, and I'm still alive. Like, am I really here after I've seen the one who's seen me? Again, it's this presence of the angel of the Lord. He is absolutely the angel of the Lord. And the most significant part of that for us is that he is God Most High in a form that doesn't consume us. But when you step away, it's like, how am I even still alive? That's what it's like to encounter that particular incarnation of God. That he saw me. Therefore, the well was called Bir Lahairoi. Behold, it is between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar bore a son to Abram, and Abram named his son, to whom Hagar gave birth, Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to him. So if we want to do a little bit of math, if it's been 10 years that he's been in Canaan, and he's 86 now, and we know that he left Ur of the Chaldeans, he left wherever it was that left his father when he was 75, we know that there's about a year's time between when he left, going to Egypt, and ended up in Canaan. I don't know if that's really significant, but it's nice to be able to look back and see, okay, we've got some math going on here. And again, we're seeing, why is God including these specific details? And so, something else I didn't see. Next verse, now when Abram was 99 years old, that's 13 years. So that means that now Ishmael is 13. I don't know if you're familiar with the Jewish practice of bar mitzvah, but bar mitzvah, and there's a bat mitzvah as well, it's like male and female. It is the celebration of a child coming to age where they are now accountable for their own choices and actions. It's like Ishmael was born, and God gave Ishmael 13 years to be raised and covered by his father. And the next stage of this did not happen until Ishmael was old enough to make decisions for himself, culturally. 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said, I am God Almighty, walk before me and be blameless. I will make my covenant between me and you, and I will multiply you exceedingly. Abram fell on his face, and God talked with him, saying, As for me, behold, my covenant is with you. And you will be the father of a multitude of nations. No longer shall you be named Abram, but your name shall be Abraham. For I have made you the father of a multitude of nations. And here's the thing, is Abram, and this is one of those things that's like, sometimes your name can be a burden to you. Abram means exalted father. Abram who had no children. He's like 86 years old before he has a child, and his entire life people have called him exalted father, and he has no children. Poor Sarai, who has no children, has to call her husband exalted father, knowing she's not given him any children. I mean, there's some heaviness to this, or could be. And then we see Abraham, father of a multitude. And notice this is not associated with Ishmael, although that's part of it. It's because of this covenant. It's like, my covenant is with you, and my covenant is, I'm changing. You're not just going to be an exalted father, not just like the head of a household. I'm going to make you a father of multitude. Yes.
A few years back, when you were teaching David and I about this story and things that you noticed within it, you mentioned that the HA was the breath of God.
Yes. One of the things that Pastor Jack has taught many, many times is, if we were to go back to the other page, I'd do it, but I'm afraid I get lost in the process. You look at Abram and Abraham, and you see this ha added into it. And like a lot of times, and Pastor Jack was talking about different Hebrew names, and you'll see the word or the letters L in it. Like Michael is actually Mikael, and it's got to do, you'll see the name of God put in there, because El is actually like El Shaddai, El Roy is the God, it's God. And then you'll see other names that have the Ha put in there, and it's like God's breathing life into somebody's name. So he goes from Abram, exalted father, to Abraham, For I have made you the father of a multitude of nations. I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make nations of you, and kings will come from you. I will establish my covenant between me and you and your descendants after you throughout their generations as an everlasting covenant to be God to you and to your descendants after you. I mean, there's a lot of repetition in here, but God's making it very clear. His covenant, and that's my covenant, is with you. An everlasting covenant. Listen, when God says everlasting, it really ought to be all caps. Or all capital letters. I think all cap is something else now. But when he's saying this, he's like, it's going to be for you and your descendants after you. I will give to you and your descendants after you the land where you live as a stranger, all the land of Canaan as an everlasting possession, and I will be their God.
Let me ask you something.
Sure.
When God made those promises about your descendants forever, well, can you actually track down these people that came from?
The Jews can.
Is that a possibility?
They absolutely can. When the people who are Jewish, like right now, they know who the people are who are descendants of Levi. They know who are people who are genetically, yes.
Yeah, they've got a DNA.
Part of one of the things that you see culturally speaking is one of the reasons we have these long lists of genealogies. That didn't stop when the Bible stopped. They have tracked who they are. I mean, they know who they are. They know where they came from. But that was cultural.
I'd be kind of pretty proud of something like that. You know?
Many of them
I
are,
wouldn't let it be a secret.
and many of them are.
You know?
Many of them are also terrified
Right.
because of how persecuted the Jews have been since this point. There are those who actually have changed their name and avoided certain customs, which we'll get into shortly. Out of fear, is like, I don't want him to be a Jew, because if he's a Jew, if he's an Israelite, then he's wide open. I mean, they've been hit by the entire world virtually since they became a nation, since before really. But yes, they absolutely know who they are and where they came from. They may not acknowledge it, but they know.
They don't want any retaliation.
Yeah. I mean, look at what the mess they're in right now.
Right.
I mean, this is a nation that's been backed into a corner way too many times for no other reason than because they're God's chosen people. Whether their enemies acknowledge that or not, but I mean, they're surrounded by countries right now that hate them for no other reason than they're Israel.
Yeah. Right.
And then we get into the physical side of the covenant. This is my covenant which you shall keep between me and you and your descendants after you. Every male among you shall be circumcised. And you shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be the sign of the covenant between me and you. And every male among you who is 8 days old shall be circumcised throughout your generations, including a slave who is born in the house or who is bought with money from any foreigner who is not of your descendants. See, this is another sign that a slave is not just property. It's brought into the family, it's not treated like a thing. This is a human being who's being brought into this fellowship, into this, I mean, you're family, nationality, you're part of this, but a slave who is born in your house or who is bought with your money shall certainly be circumcised. So my covenant shall be in your flesh as an everlasting covenant. But as for an uncircumcised male, one who is not circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin, that person shall be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant. I mean, this is something that's literally right after birth. Every single male will be marked this way. Every male who joins will be marked this way. If you aren't willing to make a change in what you are, in about as personal a way as you can do, if you're not willing to do this, you're not worthy of God. And in fact, it's a choice. This is one of the things that you see later on with Moses when he goes back to Egypt. Like, he's on the way, and the angel of the Lord comes and is ready to kill somebody. Zipporah knew right off the bat, okay, here's the problem. You never did this for your son. You're about to go represent God to all your people, and you haven't even followed through with this with your own son. And then there's the whole, you've made me a bride of blood. But this is a big deal. In fact, culturally speaking, this the ceremony at the 8th day is called a bris, and it's a huge cultural identity. It's something that it's as real and significant to them as the Sabbath is, and that's saying something. But this is also, not to go too deep into this, but this is also another reason why we know that Moses knew he wasn't an Egyptian. Like every single day he had a reminder he's different than everybody else around him. Because we noticed that it was the son that was the problem, not Moses. Like Moses was kept for 3 months before he was turned over to Pharaoh's daughter, so we know that the 8th day had already occurred. Culturally speaking, this son of Abraham. So anyway, moving right along.
The physical part of that too, the vitamin K. Your body produces vitamin K on the 8th day. So,
8th day, yes.
So your blood would clot at that point where it wouldn't.
There's so much. There's like one, you've got the 7 days, which is an acknowledgement of every time you see 7, it's an acknowledgement that God is God and He created the 7-day week. But 8th day is also the day of new beginnings. It's the day where you start what's coming after the rest, because we aren't supposed to stay in like. Okay, I had to phrase that carefully, but we are supposed to like continue, and on the 8th day, that's when that happens. On the 8th day, that's when you are officially marked as you're now part of this covenant. You are brought into this, more than just into this family. You're brought into this covenant, which is absolutely huge. But yes, like physically speaking, there's all kinds of stuff that like the immune system is kicked in, vitamin K. Doing it sooner than that, without way more medical things available to them than they had, would have been dangerous. Also, I'm not certain about this. It's just kind of popped in my head, but I think that was also the naming day. I'm not sure that they actually gave the name until that point. They may have like chosen one, but I think that was official when you were brought into the family. I could be wrong on that though. So.
Benjamin, I just want to ask you one more thing.
Sure.
You know your stuff. Doesn't it seem odd that these names, which are real people, actually mean something that happened right then and there? You know what I mean? It's like we call him so-and-so because this is what happened.
Right.
Like, how do you put that together?
Well, depending on the name, sometimes the name was changed because of what was going on around them. Like Abraham's name has just been changed because of what God was doing, changing his life. Jacob's name, which we'll get to later, was changed to Israel because of a major change that was going on in his life there where God had met him. Then you see other ones who were named, I'm going to get the names as like mixed up, but one of them means the land was divided, and it was somebody who was born at the time when, right around Babel, when all the people's languages are split up. Later on, you see in the book of Samuel, Eli, when his 2 sons went off and were murdered, his grandson was born at the same time and was named I can't even think of, but it means the glory has departed because of the Ark of the Covenant. So a lot of times you see some of the names are changed later on in life, and some of the names come about because like the mother or father named the child based on what was going on in the thing. But also we're so used to English. Like English has been like a language that's borrowed from other languages for so long. Many other cultures, like most of the old cultures, the names meant activities or were things. I mean, we talk about the Native Americans. Many of them was like, well, running bear or something like that. But even our last names, you see Cooper, which is a barrel maker, or Smith, or you see, I mean, just all these names. They were more than just a moniker. They were more than just what to holler out in the crowd. It meant who you were and what you did. It's just our English, American English especially, we've borrowed from all these things, and we have the sounds, but we don't always have the meanings, which is part of the problem that we have with some of the Bible, is we understand the sounds and the usage, but not where it came from. Yes?
Yeah, through some research I found out that my last name, which is Duels now, started out as a way of depicting that my great whatever parents lived by the river, which in Belgian was the way.
Ah, okay.
Oh, interesting.
See, sometimes you got to go you got to go back. You got to go to where it came from to figure out why. So that, I mean, and names are a great thing.
When the system comes in, they have to have a way of writing it down and spelling it out.
Right.
That's when it changes from the way to DUELZ.
Mm-hmm.
So the postal system.
Yeah, well, we'll get into all that. Okay. Then God said to Abraham, not Abram, as for your wife Sarai, you shall not call her by the name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. I will bless her, and indeed I will give you a son by her. Then I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. Kings of people will come from her. Then Abraham fell on his face. I've gotten so used to saying Abram and not saying Abraham. Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed, and said in his heart, will a child be born to a man 100 years old? And will Sarah, who is 90 years old, give birth to a child? It's interesting, like Sarah gets a lot of guff for having laughed, but Abraham laughed too. Also, it's an interesting point. This is the first part of the next chapter is going to cover basically the same thing. And I'm not sure if this is actually, a lot of times the Bible will go through and they'll give you the story, then they'll stop, and then they'll cut back, and then they'll retell that story, but they'll give different details. I think that's what's about to happen. It's either that or God showed up in a very short amount of time, 2 different times to discuss the same stuff. But in this one, Abraham laughs.
And also there can be a mocking laughter and a joyful laughter.
Right. And I think based on what he's about to do, it was definitely not mocking, because Abraham, he might make some bad decisions, but he knew how to talk to God. Abraham said to God, "Oh, that Ishmael might live before you," or "Oh, that this blessing might be for Ishmael." It's almost like Abraham's giving God an out. And I guess it's only fair to say at this point, we have the rest of the Bible. Abraham didn't. This was the first time that God had ever interacted with any human being this way. And every other God that anybody knew of or pretended to know didn't do what God is doing. God hasn't done, other than the flood, what massive nature-changing miracles is Abraham even aware of? He knows of the glory of God. He knows of the awesomeness of the encounters he's having with him, but it's almost like he doesn't realize at this point what God is actually capable of. Now that changes, but it's like, and that's another thing is God is so patient with ignorance, and I'll take that to the bank, folks. Thank you that God is patient. Oh, that Ishmael might live before you. But God said, no, but your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you shall name him Isaac, which is, let's just click that just to see, means he laughs, or it means laughter. It's like you laughed, but I'm going to have the last laugh. But again, the laughter might be one of disbelief, but it's going to become one of joy. And I love that about God too, because He will transform. He won't change a thing and transform everything. Like, this is the laughter you had. This is the laughter you will have. And every time you laugh, you're going to know. It says you doubted, but Isaac.
What about that phrase, "or that Ishmael might live before you"?
It's the being in the presence of the king to benefit from the close association.
So it's a positive thing.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, it's his son.
Oh, it's good for him.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And it goes, and Isaac, and I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him. This is Isaac. As for Ishmael, I have heard you. Those some words right there. Yahweh has heard you. Behold, I will bless him, and make him fruitful, and multiply him exceedingly. He shall father 12 princes, and I will make him into a great nation. But I will establish my covenant with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear. Making this very clear. This whole Hagar thing doesn't need to happen again. Who will bear to you at this season next year. So we've got, this is a promise that will be fulfilled in a year's time. That's very specific. God doesn't do that very often. When he finished talking with him, God went up from Abraham. There's a couple of points here where it looks like that's how we know God's done, because he just left. He's just okay, we're done. It's It's like Jesus does this later on in the New Testament. He gets done, he gets things stirred up, and then just fades away. Like they look for him, but they can't find him. Apparently he's been at that for a very long time. Then Abraham took his son Ishmael, and all the slaves who were born to his house, and all who were bought with his money, every male among the men of Abraham's household, and circumcised the flesh of their foreskin on this very same day. Now we know that he at one point had an army of like 318 men. Yikes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now Abraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin, and his son Ishmael was 13 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. On this very same day, Abraham was circumcised as well as his son Ishmael. And all the men of his household, those who were born in the house or bought with money from a foreigner, were circumcised with him. I'm going to wrap it up here because I'm actually amazed we got that far. I will point out some interesting things. It's one of the things I don't think I've ever really processed until just this moment. Ishmael was circumcised into the covenant. Ishmael, we'll get into this in a little bit, but Ishmael and Hagar end up getting sent away because there's a problem between him and Isaac, and there doesn't need to be any confusion about because God is very clear, my covenant will be with Isaac. I mean, blessings are on Ishmael, my covenant will be with Isaac. Ishmael goes on to father these 7 tribes. Ishmael is the root that ultimately led to all of the Muslim nations. All of the conflict, because like some of the kids on Wednesday night asked me, like, so what did all this happen? And I traced it all the way back to this, because they claimed that they were the son of promise, and then the Israelites say that theirs was the son of the promise. And I had one of the kids actually say, so you're saying this whole thing started with sibling rivalry? It's like these are 2 brothers still fighting like generations later. I said, I couldn't have said it any better than that. But again, we've got this moment where their trust was insufficient and they tried to do things on their own, and the ramifications lasted generations. But that wasn't Ishmael's fault.
True.
I mean, we look at, and there's an expression now, like, I don't know how widely it's used, but you got to be careful not to birth an Ishmael, to quit trying to help God and in your own strength, because you're more likely to cause problems than you would if you just trust him. A little bit of patience goes a long way. We're going to see more where the results of not following God the way he said end up with some very long-lasting and generational issues. But at this point, Ishmael was blessed because Ishmael is of Abraham. It's really wild to me to watch, because the long-term results are definitely evil. But the people who are involved here, God blesses who he blesses. And he doesn't punish them for what their descendants are going to do or what they're going to do eventually. He deals with them here and now, where they are, and he fulfills his promises. And that's good to know.
It's funny, it used to be that lots of children was considered a blessing, and how it's not today.
That's a whole other can of worms, but yes. But on that note, I think it's clear we've seen the God of love, his grace, his blessings, his covenants, the fact that he fulfills his promises even when we mess things up is huge. And it's so reassuring to know that he's preserved this in his word so that we today can know that my perfect obedience is not required for God's blessings, for his love, and for him to still end up doing what he's going to do. He's got a plan. He's got a way to do it. He's very big. He can work around our mistakes and our shortcomings. So on that note, go with God, and I will see you.